Every 90 seconds, someone is reported missing. Many return to their families. For others, something has gone seriously wrong.
And I said, "Is Libby okay?" And she said, "No, we can't find her."
In Hull, a young female student is missing.
They decided they needed to ring the police to alert them to her disappearance.
Libby had knocked on their door in a distressed state.
Their disappearance triggers a citywide search.
This man is now shadowing her.
What happens in the police investigation that follows?
There would have been taken samples to establish whether any sexual offences had taken place.
What happens to the family at its heart?
The whole family is missing you, especially me and your dad.
When missing turns to murder.
Libby was born on January the 1st, 1998, and she was our first-born daughter. She came along after Russ and I had been together for 8 years, and we'd been married for 2 years. And she was an amazing baby. She was a really easy baby. She was just everything we wanted, and, you know, I was really keen to be a mum, so she made me a mum. She was very chatty. It was fairly obvious from being quite young that she was going to be a talker. She was very funny, incredibly funny.
Libby was very loyal, very honest. If I was to come to her with a scenario or question, she would tell me straight, even if it wasn't what I wanted to hear, which I love about her because she just kept it real. Yeah, she's just amazing.
I think Libby was very unlike a lot of the people I had previously met in my life. She was a joy to be around. I think one thing that really stuck out for me, and still to this day, she had a way of being so passionate and so kind and loving about things that other people were interested in.
I think we always had this sort of childish, fun friendship that started when we were young and sort of progressed as we got older. Like, we obviously aged as people, but I don't think our friendship really matured because we were just both really silly and did stupid things together. It was really organic.
Libby's the eldest of 4 siblings.
She was an amazing big sister. She liked them to know that she was the big sister, and she very affectionately called Beth, Maisie and Joe the children, which always used to make me giggle. And we were incredibly close. When she became older, so when she was in her early teens, she had some mental health issues and had started self-harming. She had an eating disorder and, you know, some anxiety and depression. We became really close through that. Libby knew that she could come to me and tell me anything, and I would, you know, listen without judgment. She still carried on with her studies and was still, you know, very academic, but her mental health impacted her school. So she took a gap year. She worked really hard on her mental health and really achieved some amazing things. And she always had wanted to go to university.
Libby moves to the East Yorkshire city of Hull to start her new life as a student.
Me and Libby actually first met when we turned up to a lecture that had been cancelled. We were both doing philosophy. I think she had a bit more of a passion for it than I did at the time. I knew straight away that me and Libby would be good friends. She put me at ease right away, and I just kind of felt comfortable around her.
And when she started university in 2017, she was in the best place I think she'd been ever. She was in a really good place. And looking forward to it, massively looking forward to her new life as a university student.
So we had all been invited to a pre-drinks at one of our friends' houses. I turned up late, as I normally do.
Students, including Libby, go to the house to drink before heading out into town.
This is where we had the pre-drinks, where everyone met, where everyone was in such good spirits beforehand. Yeah, we just finished our exams, so everyone's in such a good mood.
After the drinks, Libby and her friends make their way to local nightclub, the Welly.
We were all leaving the pre-drinks quite hasty, I remember, because they were quite keen to get to Welly. It wasn't a grand goodbye where I gave everyone a hug or anything, but just a throwaway goodbye, and after we went the other direction. I just remember it being absolutely freezing. There was kind of slushy snow on the ground that had been there for quite a while, and I just remember it being, yeah, absolutely Baltic, particularly so that night.
So I went to work on the Thursday night. I checked my phone, and I saw I had a missed call from Millie, her friend. And I thought, oh, Millie's phoning. And I thought, well, it's not unusual for Libby to use somebody else's phone to ring me, because she very often lost her phone or broke her phone or didn't take her phone out with her. So I called Millie back and said, oh, sorry, Millie, I missed your call. Is everything okay? And I said, is Libby okay? And she said, no, we can't find her. She explained that they'd been to a club, that she'd been drinking before they went to the club and she hadn't got in, so they'd sent her home in a taxi, and that Libby was to ring them when she got home, or text them when she got home to say, I'm home. Libby hadn't texted them, so they'd given it an hour. So about midnight, they called the house, and the housemate said, no, Libby hasn't turned up.
Now, when her friends contacted someone else who was living in the house, they realised that Libby had left her phone at home, so something was unusual, and the friends realised that they needed to go and look for her, basically. Initially, they thought that maybe she had gone to one of her neighbours' houses, because she'd sometimes knocked on their door after a night out, but actually they couldn't find her anywhere. They even drove to a local takeaway, and it was in the early hours of the morning on February the 1st that they decided they needed to ring the police to alert them to her disappearance.
That night was the worst night ever.
Libby's friends and family are really worried now, so much so that they call the police. And the procedure in this situation would be that local uniform officers would attend and take a missing persons report. And part of that process is to get an understanding of the person that's been reported missing, build up a picture of their life. And the police start doing this. And when they start to build up the picture, what they're seeing is this is really out of character for Libby. Libby's not the sort of person to go missing. But what sort of a person is she? What is her background?
By this point, the police had been informed. They were informed about 3 o'clock in the morning, so I was also having communication with the police. And she hasn't called me. That was the thing. She hadn't called me. Now, she would stop strangers in the street and ask to borrow their phone to ring me, and she hadn't. And I knew if she was in trouble, she would ring me. And I had nothing from her. And it had been 8 hours, and I don't think we ever went 8 hours without a message or a text.
When police take a missing person report, they're classified as either low, medium or high risk. And they come to this by looking at the person that's gone missing. Is this out of character? What do we know about them and their lifestyle? And one of the things that now will be concerning the police is that Libby has a history of mental health. Is this a reason she's gone missing? And does this raise a concern around her? And this is really out of character. Where is she? She was expected to be home. She's left the phone at home, so she's going to be hard to contact. And it's snowing, it's really cold, and she's been drinking. And that's going to really raise the concerns now for the police.
Detectives know Libby's disappearance is out of the ordinary.
This is now a high-risk missing persons inquiry, which means there will be lots of resources put into it to try and find Libby.
The search for Libby was as extensive as you can imagine. Hull is a city that has a number of rivers associated with it, a lot of water courses. That obviously presents a danger, a lot of open space. And there was a massive mobilisation of police search teams, volunteer teams, the student population. Everybody was out looking for Libby.
I remember saying, she has to be somewhere. People don't just disappear. But there had been no sightings of her. Nobody knew where she was. And that was the worst feeling, a horrible feeling.
For all anybody knew, she disappeared into thin air.
The police need to retrace Libby's steps prior to her disappearance.
They will now be knocking on doors, trying to find witnesses, looking at CCTV in the area, building up a picture of Libby's life from her friends and family to try and identify somewhere where she may have gone to.
But really, they need to work out where has she gone. So they tracked down the taxi driver who dropped her off. Did he know where she'd gone? Well, he described dropping her off outside her house and seeing her heading towards it. A set of Libby's keys were found in the house of another group of girls who lived on the corner of the road where Libby lived. And so what had happened is, after she'd gone towards her house, she'd changed her mind, walked up the road, and these girls reported that Libby had knocked on their door in a distressed state. They hadn't really been able to get any sense from her at all, and at that point she'd dropped her keys on a distinctive keyring in their garden. She'd gone, they'd tried to help her, she didn't want to be helped, she'd gone away, and then she'd walked on up the road.
The detectives scour local CCTV for any trace of Libby.
The house outside which Libby's keys have been found is on the corner of a main road, and that will open up options for the police in terms of CCTV, buses that may be going past, cars that are going past with dash cam footage. So the fact she's now in a more built-up, busy area could now start to give clues as to where she may have gone.
So Libby lived on Wellesley Avenue. The CCTV picked her up leaving Wellesley Avenue and walking onto Beverley Road, which is a main road, very busy road running through the student area.
And what they can see from this is that Libby has walked up the road to a bus stop, and there she'd started to interact with some people. These people had concerns about Libby. She'd clearly been drinking, and it was cold. She was a lone female, young female, on her own out that night, and they had obvious concerns. And they did try to help her, but she didn't want the help. She didn't want to engage. Now, at this stage, nothing in this footage seemed untoward. The two witnesses left Libby at this point, and she was at the bus stop, and she remained there for some time. Whether she was sheltering from the weather or not, it's hard to say.
And then a man emerged from a side road, didn't speak to her or interact with her, almost as if he was deliberately ignoring her, crossed the road and went down a side street opposite. He was then seen to emerge from that side street.
Libby then leaves the bus stop and starts walking up Beverley Road. And what is of concern now that can be seen on the CCTV is this man is now shadowing her. He's mirroring her direction up the road, almost as if he is lurking now in the darkness on the other side of the street. Libby now reaches a disused convent, which is quite a dark area of the street. The man crosses the road at this dark point of the street, and he approaches Libby. For a few seconds, they disappear, and the pair of them walk into this disused convent.
We saw Libby and this man emerging from the entranceway to the convent, and they tracked back towards the bus stop where Libby had been.
What we can see is that it appears that Libby is voluntarily following the man, and it's here that they are picked up on a different camera from inside a builder's firm.
And what you saw there was this man sat in his car with the door open, with his legs out on the pavement, whilst Libby was sort of on the corner of the road. Now, you might wonder, what was he doing there?
And it's only when another car moves away that had been sitting there with some occupants in it that the man then approaches Libby and the pair of them get into his car. Why would he be waiting for this car seemingly to leave before he invites Libby into his car? When you're conducting these types of investigations, CCTV isn't always perfect. And in some instances, there could be things that obscure it. And that's what happens here.
We couldn't actually see one of these quirks of evidence, how she got into the car.
Was it completely voluntary, or was there some kind of threat? It's really difficult to tell at this stage. But we do know that she gets into the car and the car now drives off.
Coffee for Ben? Ben?
Crispy wafer, filled with creamy hazelnut, dipped and drizzled in delicious chocolate.
Ben!
Actually, it's pronounced wet.
Wet. Why be basic when you can be bueno?
Throughout time, governments and the people who work for them have done strange and even terrible things in the name of national interest.
But there's one thing more powerful than any agency or army: the truth. This is the history lesson you didn't see coming.
New Secrets Declassified with David Duchovny. Tuesdays at 9.
On Sky History.
Once you know that Libby has got into a car and she's left Hayworth Street in that vehicle, that's when the police can start to widen this CCTV net. And by that painstaking investigation, they were able to start to track the movement of that vehicle. So they could follow that car, and it left Hayworth Street, and it eventually ended up on the playing fields at Oak Road, a short distance away. The important thing about Oak Road was that we knew that they both arrived at Oak Road. They'd both been in the car. There'd been no moment where Libby could have got out of the car. What we also knew from Oak Road is that only the driver left that area. So something had happened at Oak Road. As soon as the police knew that, there was a potential scene. There's another place where you can deploy officers, you can search for clues, you can search for Libby, you can try and find out where she is. Of course, at the same time, you're still tracking that car. If Libby's not in it, you need to know who was. And so you're establishing where did it go, what model was it, can you get the number plate, who was the driver.
It's been 4 days since Libby's disappearance. While the police analysed the CCTV footage, Libby's family appealed to the public for her safe return.
Please get in touch with us any way you can.
I just sort of said, you know, I just need to know you're safe. Please let me know that you're safe if you can. We're all really missing you. And, you know, and I just sort of said it's breaking my heart not knowing where you are.
The police's media strategy started to really have an impact, and members of the public were coming forward with various bits of information. But now some really important information has come from one particular witness who lives near to Oak Road. They hear a female screaming, and then they see a man running past their house. And this all lines up with the CCTV that the police now have of this car driving into Oak Road, the car parked there. So this is now going to start to really cause concerns as to what may have happened to Libby.
The police urgently need to speak to the man in the car from the CCTV.
Well, the police were able to establish the registration number and make of this vehicle. And they were also able to establish some pretty good photographs of the person who was driving it from the footage.
Police can now identify this man. He's Pavel Relevich, a 24-year-old man originally from Poland. He's a butcher, and he lives nearby in Raglan Street with his wife and 2 young children.
So in the early hours of February the 6th, police swooped on his home address and they were able to arrest him there.
Relevich was arrested and interviewed in relation to the disappearance of Libby. And essentially he said he had nothing to do with it. He had no idea what it was and denied any interaction with Libby.
Now, in the days after Pavel Relevich's arrest, we were expecting him to be charged at some point with the disappearance, the abduction of Libby Squire. But when the announcement from the police came through at the end of the 48 hours that they're legally allowed to hold him, he was actually charged with a whole load of unrelated crimes, and it was much more serious than any of us had realised.
One of the processes that they will be going through when somebody's arrested for a serious crime like this is that they would take his fingerprints and his DNA. Now, this is the first time the police would have had that from him, which would have involved now loading it onto the national DNA database. The DNA on that database gets there by one of two ways, either by people getting arrested, providing their DNA and it getting loaded on, but also from crime scenes. What will often happen is that samples are taken from a crime scene and the person that's committed the crime has left that sample there, hasn't been arrested before. So it will sit there awaiting, hopefully in the future that person gets arrested and the police can marry up the arrested person's DNA with the crime scene samples from the past. And that's exactly what happened.
And so they're interviewing this man on suspicion of the disappearance of Libby Squire, but they're getting these hits for unsolved, unlinked burglaries and sexual offences, voyeurism, exposing himself to young women in the street, committing burglaries of women's houses, that sort of, strange behaviour. And these little DNA hits are coming up, so they know that the man they're talking to not only had Libby Squire in his car, but he's been behaving in this sort of predatory, sexual way in and around that area over quite a long period of time. In the boot of Relovich's car was a bag, a hold-all type bag, and in that hold-all was effectively, it was a bag of trophies, if you like.
Things like mobile phones and their computers.
Things that he'd stolen from young women when he'd been into their houses and kept in this bag in the boot of his car. That was a massive breakthrough because that also meant the police could link him to more and more of these offences.
The picture now that is being built up of Relovich's criminal history and progression of his crimes is now starting to make police think that Libby has come to some serious harm at the hands of this man.
His words could change the direction of a society. This is a culmination of everything.
If we want to understand who we are, it begins with an honest conversation about
Thomas Jefferson, Fridays at 9, new on Sky History.
The police have arrested a prolific sexual criminal, but they lack sufficient evidence to link him with the disappearance of Libby Squire.
Despite the huge amount of resources police are putting into the search for Libby, they can't find her. And this is making it difficult to build a case against Relovich.
Libby's body still hadn't been found, but he had been charged with the non-contact sexual offences, and he pleaded guilty. He admitted those, so there was no trial.
The upshot is that Pavel Relovich was jailed for 5 years and 8 months for these crimes against 11 different women, and it allowed the police to have time to investigate Libby's disappearance and try to get that breakthrough that would allow them to pin her disappearance on him.
It's been nearly 7 weeks since Libby disappeared.
On the 20th of March, a boat was on a fishing trip in the Humber estuary, which goes out into the North Sea. The skipper of the boat saw a body in the water and called the lifeguard. The body was very carefully removed from the water, bearing in mind any potential forensic evidence. But very quickly, I think everybody's worst fears were confirmed.
It was a Wednesday, 20th of March. Sam, our liaison officer, rang. So I picked up the phone. I said, "Oh, hi, Sam, is everything okay?" And she said, "Oh, can you talk?" And I said, "Yes, yeah, I can." And she said, "I've just been made aware that a female body has been spotted in the Humber estuary." She said, "Oh, is someone with you?" And I said, "Yeah, Ross was with me." And she said, "Lisa, it's Libby." And I just... That was really hard. films, you know, people fall down walls and slide on the floor, and I just sat on the sofa, and it was like my whole world just went like that. She was identified by dental work and fingerprints. I think because she'd been in the water for so long, her fingerprints were quite difficult to take. I bought her a necklace for her birthday with an L on it for her 21st, and she said that she was face down in the water, and the L on her necklace was showing. You could see the L, and it was almost like her saying, "It's me, I'm here."
I think because you are in that limbo and you don't have an idea of what's happened and there's no conclusion, you know, you prepare for the worst, but even when you get the news, it's rocks your world a little bit in a way.
When you hear that your friend's been found dead, there's no way you can really describe that feeling apart from numb, especially after weeks and weeks and weeks of waiting for an outcome. And that was the outcome.
The important element now is going to be a post-mortem examination for a forensic pathologist to examine Libby's body to try and ascertain a cause of death and the circumstances around it.
Another serious problem that the police faced was to establish exactly when she had died.
Drowning, as any pathologist will tell you, is really a diagnosis of exclusion because it was in the water for so long. It's almost impossible to say whether someone had drowned. You obviously look for other marks of injury, but the body here was quite decomposed. It was really a case of there being no clear evidence one way or another as to exactly how or why she died.
Unfortunately, in this instance, because of the circumstances in which Libby had entered the water, the forensic pathologist was unable to identify a cause of death. What also would have been going on at the post-mortem is samples being taken to try and link potentially a suspect to Libby's death and disappearance. These would have included things like nail scrapings, and when we look at the circumstances of Libby's disappearance, the person she was last seen with, Relovich, is a sexual predator. So they would have been taking samples to establish whether any sexual offences had taken place.
Swabs were taken from inside Libby's body, and on the high vaginal swab they recovered semen, and that semen matched the DNA profile of Pavel Relovich.
This was an extraordinary scientific breakthrough. I mean, she'd been in the water for so long that, I mean, certainly I had no expectation that the police were going to be able to recover any meaningful DNA.
There was this incontrovertible evidence that he must have had sexual contact with her on the night that she died.
What it allowed the police to do was cast doubt on the story they'd been given by Pavel Relovich, but actually this painted a very different, more sinister picture.
Based on the damning DNA evidence, investigators move in to arrest Relovich.
Police went to the Crown Prosecution Service with this new evidence, and they authorised that Relovich should be charged with Libby's rape and murder.
On the 24th of October 2019, they arrested and charged Pavel Relovich with Libby's abduction, rape and murder. So yeah, he was arrested and charged from prison. We came to, organising the funeral, and I knew it would be a really big affair. We had the church, and I decided to treat it like her wedding day because she was never going to get married, but I could give her everything that I would want to give her in a wedding. I could give her on her day.
Libby's funeral was a very tough day. I think there was such a sadness that surrounded it that it was just so difficult.
I think the funeral stands out most in my memory. I remember that the most, which was weird, a very weird time. But yeah, I haven't been to many funerals in my life. So yeah, that was the funeral I remember very, very well.
I remember having a reserved seat in one of the front rows. And when her body was brought in the coffin, it was sort of like the last however many months of my life had just come down to that one moment.
The church was absolutely packed. There was over 400 people there. And it was really beautiful, and it was a lovely day. And then we went on to the crematorium, and we had a more private cremation. I think it was about 150 people that came to that. And that was hard. I had to walk away from her. And I knew that I'd never see her again, or she wasn't going to be on earth anymore. And walking away from her was the hardest thing I've ever done. Really, really hard. And oh God, I just felt like I'd left half of me there, you know, and it was really, really tough.
Jefferson is acting like a king, the very thing he supposedly despised.
He promised his wife before she breathed her last that he would never marry again.
His words could change the direction of a society. This is a culmination of everything.
If we want to understand who we are, it begins with an honest conversation about
Thomas Jefferson, Fridays at 9, new on Sky History.
The trial was booked for June of 2020, but with COVID and what have you, it was postponed. And we finally went to trial January the 11th of 2021, so she'd actually been dead nearly 2 years when we went to trial.
So the trial lasted for 4.5 weeks, which must have been very painful for the family because it was a long time, a long drawn-out period where they had to hear in detail about what had happened to Libby, and also to hear the lies and deception that was spun by Pavel Relevich as he tried to throw everybody off the scent.
I took the view that there was sufficient evidence to charge him with rape and with murder, given his inconsistent accounts, the recovery of Libby's body, and the DNA linking him to her and proving that he'd had sexual contact with her. The case was always going to be challenging. First of all, there was no clear cause of death. So we hadn't recovered from Libby's body any evidence that she'd been strangled or that she'd been violently assaulted. Could we prove that she died by some unlawful act, as opposed to she might have run off and fallen in the river, she might have deliberately put herself in the river? There were a number of possibilities that we had to discount. The CCTV was obviously vital, but it was a circumstantial case built around that CCTV, drawing together all these different strands of evidence to present a compelling picture.
So what we became aware of at the trial was the extent to which Pavel Relevich had been cruising the streets of Hull looking for another woman to commit sex crimes against. On the night of Libby's disappearance, he'd spent hours driving around and slowing down and looking for women. He would later claim that he had even been trying to look through windows to see people have sex, but had been unsuccessful. So you get a full picture of just what a deviant mindset he was. He was really, really ruthless, and he was clearly setting out to find someone to cause really serious harm to.
Well, the challenge of proving how Libby had died was really to bring together all of the circumstantial evidence and to really make this simple point to the jury. What are the chances that this girl should end up dead in the water, who had been raped, who had come into contact with a man who had this history of sexual offending, who had this predatory behaviour? The idea that she would accidentally die as a result of this contact with Relevich, we thought was fanciful.
He clearly had warped sexual desires that were overwhelming, and the idea that that just stopped entirely so he could have a consensual encounter with a woman on the street seems unlikely.
It was really a question of meticulous preparation and working very closely with the police to develop an electronic presentation that brought this case to life. So we plotted all of the CCTV onto plans, and we had a system whereby the jury could effectively fly over the streets in a map view, really walking through the journey that Libby had taken, walking through the journey that Relevich had taken. And you could see Libby in that condition, waiting by the bus stop, and by chance you've got Relovich circling round, and that, like the spider and the fly, she came into his web, and then she's taken away in the car. So it was being able to walk the jury through all of that.
We attended every day, and it was really important for me to be there every day. So I treated the court case right from day one. I went into it as a fact-finding mission to find out what had happened that night. I wanted everything laid out in, timeline order and what had happened, and that's exactly what we got. And it really showed how wonderful the police case was. They were quite incredible.
In spite of the strong case against Relovich, he pleads not guilty and prepares his defence.
His defence was really to run this idea that, how do you know that she was killed at all? The pathology couldn't establish that she had been killed as opposed to had an accident. He, through his counsel, explored the idea that Libby had mental health problems, that maybe she'd taken her own life, that she liked to get extremely drunk on some occasions, that perhaps she'd fallen in the river, perhaps she'd deliberately put herself in the river. So really it was, rather than running a positive case, it was saying, the prosecution can't close off all of these avenues. That was his defence.
So he denied it. He changed his story on the stand. I think that was the 7th version we had. The only bit I got really annoyed at was when the defence brought her mental health into it. Because she'd had mental health issues in the past, she'd felt so guilty about having consensual sex with this person that she'd never met, which was so out of Libby's character, that she'd thrown herself in the river. And that was, like, Libby made her own mind up. If she decided to have sex with a stranger, she would have had sex with a stranger and she would have owned it. She wouldn't have thrown herself in the river.
A crucial element to the timeline would have been the amount of time that Relovich was at Oak Road Park with Libby. And from the CCTV, the police were able to establish they were there for about 7.5 minutes. It was about 7.5 minutes from the time Relovich parked the car there with Libby before he left alone. Now, on the prosecution case, it would have been 7.5 minutes in which he would have lured Libby to wherever it was. He then went on to rape her, murder her, and then dispose of her body in a river, which doesn't give an awful lot of time.
The CCTV revealed that after the first visit to Oak Road, he went back to his home address. He was inside his house for a reasonably short period of time. We know from downloading his mobile telephone that he was using online pornography for a period of time. He then went back out from his home address, back in his car, back to Oak Road playing fields, this time for about 4 minutes.
The fact that he later returned there and spent another 4 minutes added to that, giving an extra window in which for all of this activity to take place.
He didn't have to have done everything in the same visit. And that the second visit, in my view, made a really powerful point. If she had been alive, but he'd raped her, why on earth would he go back? So the fact that he went straight back told me that he knew he was safe to go back. In other words, he knew that he'd killed her. He knew that it was safe to go back, and he was going back for a purpose, probably to move the body. The CCTV officer was a crucial witness because he helped me to present that case to the jury. Some of the other key witnesses, the people who'd spoken to Libby before Relovich came into contact with her, they were crucial to establish that she was in no condition to consent to sex with this man. So that established the rape.
An important witness for the prosecution was the man who lived near to Oak Road car park. Him hearing that scream at the time that he could time when Libby and Relovich were there, it doesn't really add to a consensual encounter. Libby was screaming, which goes more towards the rape than a consensual encounter. And it's no coincidence that Libby died very shortly after that encounter.
And then we had the scientific evidence. That was crucial. The recovery of the swabs, the pathology. And if you look at this case in the round, this was not a coincidence that she happens to die just after she's met this man. I would say that throughout the trial, Relovich was completely impassive.
I remember Sam saying, you know, you will want to stare at him, just stare him down, but all of a sudden you'll get bored with looking at him. And she was completely right. I remember when I saw him in court, I just thought, God, you're pathetic. You know, you are nothing. You are just so... There is nothing about him. He's like completely immaterial.
I think one of the things the jury would have struggled with, they would have convicted him on rape in fairly short order because it was pretty clear that that wouldn't have been a consensual encounter. We don't know how she ended up in the river. We just know that she ended up in the river. And so she could have ended up in the river from anything from being murdered by Pavel Relovich to jumping in the water to try and escape him. And I think that was a problem that the jury would have been stuck on for quite a long time.
5 days the jury had been out. They came into court and they convicted him of rape and they convicted him of murder.
So when the judge sentenced Pavel Relovich to life with a minimum of 27 years for the rape and murder of Libby Squire, he told him he was a very dangerous individual and he was confident that if he hadn't been stopped, he would have gone on to commit further offences.
When the verdict came in, I felt really happy for the police because they had worked so hard and they had... I mean, they'd been invested in this for 2 years by that point, and I was really pleased for them. Libby didn't come back, but she had got some justice, and more importantly, she had paid the ultimate price, but she had got a really dangerous man off the streets, and because of her, the streets of Hull were safer. So, in a way, it was almost a bit of recognition for what she'd done. That's how I saw it. At the time.
Relovich has been convicted of rape and murder. But some questions in the case may forever go unanswered.
I got some of the answers I wanted. One of the biggest things I needed to know was, I wanted to know when she got in the car, was she cold or was she tight? You know, was she chatty? Was she not chatty? Was she crying? I discovered, actually not until the court case, that she would have been suffering with the early stages of hypothermia. So that comforted me because she really wouldn't have known what was going on. But the main thing I wanted to know was how she died, and that keeps me awake at night time still. So yeah, I got some answers, but some questions were answered, but then gave me more questions. But I think that's the whole nature of child loss or losing a loved one.
This was one of the more disturbing cases I've ever worked on, just due to the cruelty with which Libby was snatched away from a family who loved her, and also the long wait that they had to endure to find out what happened to her.
I think I really did struggle for quite a long time, actually. I'd gone on some medication at the time. I was going out a bit more and drinking a bit more. But the fact of the matter is I can wake up every morning and go about my day, and that was taken away from Libby. So I think it's just given me the push to think, you know, appreciate the things that I have and appreciate the things that are here. Love my friends, love my family. And yeah, just don't take anyone for granted, basically.
I don't think I have managed my grief over the years. It's weird because I think of her every day, every single day. But when I think about actually what has happened, it doesn't hit me until I really, really think about it, because it's still like, I still don't believe that happened to her. I know she's gone here, like I can't physically see her, but it still is crazy to me that how she passed. So yeah, that's what's hard.
I'd never met anyone like her before I'd met her. So I think in terms of that, she completely left an impact as well. So easy to get on with, and it's sort of one of those friendships where you just want to be a little bit more like Libby. So I sort of strive to take a little piece with me everywhere I go. And yeah, I just loved the way that she got happiness from other people.
Libby's mum Lisa now educates young people in the hope that what happened to her daughter doesn't happen to someone else.
Everything I do now is based on learning. So, you know, going in and talking to, you know, I've talked to thousands of children, just sort of making them aware that, you know, things can happen. In that time, Libby is alive again. You know, we can learn from what happened to Libby. And it's all her. I'm just her voice now. And it gives me an immense amount of pride in her, because she is still helping people. Libby always put other people first. She always was helpful. She was a kind, generous person. She's doing that from the other side by doing this. She's saving women. So, yeah, I'm incredibly proud of her.